Okay, here's the rewritten script in super simple English, like friendly gossip you tell friend. It's paragraph style, no timestamps, same info line by line, no adding or cutting anything, just easier words and casual storytelling tone that up to now, I always thought Tony Curtis was the worst actor ever on screen. For decades, Tony Curtis was one of Hollywood's cleanest and best-looking symbols. He was charming, handsome, and seemed almost perfect and untouchable. He was the kind of star that fans trusted completely, no questions asked. But off-screen, his life was a mess with addiction, depression, and relationships that never lasted. He had 6 marriages, tons of affairs, and a private life full of chaos that most people didn't want to look at too hard. And yet, none of that got anyone ready for what came out years after he died. An allegation from Kim Novak. One so upsetting that it makes everyone rethink who Tony Curtis really was. The rise of Tony Curtis. For most of the 1950s, Tony Curtis was Hollywood's perfect leading man. He had the great looks, the confidence, the voice, and a way on screen that made him feel both easy to relate to and kind of out of reach at the same time. Fans saw charm. Studios saw money. Magazines saw a total heartthrob made for fame. But that image wasn't the full story. Behind the shiny roles and all the careful PR, Curtis had a personal past that was shaky, painful, and never fixed. And long after his death, that hidden side came back up again. This time through another Hollywood star, Kim Novak, who made an accusation so shocking it changed how lots of people look back at his legacy now. Tony Curtis was born Bernard Schwartz on June 3rd, 1925 in Manhattan, New York City. He was the oldest of 3 kids born to Emanuel Schwartz and Helen Klein, Jewish immigrants who dealt with really tough money problems. The family ended up in the Bronx where cash was always short and every day felt uncertain. Curtis grew up in an apartment where his parents mostly spoke Hungarian and Yiddish. As a kid, he had trouble talking to people outside home, and he often felt alone and behind the other kids. His home life wasn't steady at all. Curtis later talked openly about how his mom had big mood swings, and the house was full of tension and fear a lot. Discipline could be really tough. Love and hugs weren't steady. For Curtis, home wasn't safe or comforting. It was just something he had to get through. At age 12, Curtis went through a loss that stayed with him forever. His younger brother, Julius, died after a truck hit him. The accident happened fast. It was awful, and it broke him. Curtis never really got over it. Friends and family said later that the death left a clear mark on him, and it kept coming back in his grown-up life. Years later, another tragedy hit when his brother Robert died too. All those losses made a pattern in his early years. Things unstable, then big sadness. With hardly any time to deal with it, his schoolwork suffered. He skipped school a lot and never saw books as a way to get ahead. Curtis later said he learned life the hard way, with no one guiding or protecting him. In 1943, he joined the United States Navy during World War II. He worked as a signalman third class on the submarine tender USS Proteus in 1945. Curtis was there in Tokyo Bay when Japan officially surrendered. The moment was huge in history, but it also really shook him up. Like a lot of soldiers, he came home with memories that wouldn't go away. Getting back to normal life was hard. The strict military rules went away, and he felt restless and stressed inside with no fix. After the war, Curtis looked for something to do. He signed up at the New School for Social Research to study acting. He got pulled toward performing as his next step. By the late 1940s, he went to Hollywood. Universal Pictures signed him up, but they had one rule. He had to change his name from Bernard Schwartz to Tony Curtis. The new name worked great. His first parts were tiny, like a quick spot in Crisscross in 1949, but his looks made people notice him right away. Studios pushed him hard. By the early 1950s, Curtis was everywhere in theaters and fan magazines. They sold him as charming, funny, and super confident. Off-screen, his dating life became part of his image too. What shocked a lot of critics was that Curtis didn't stick to easy, fun roles. In Sweet Smell of Success, he gave a strong, creepy performance that showed he had real talent. In The Defiant Ones, he acted with Sidney Poitier and got an Oscar nomination, showing he could handle serious stuff. Over more than 60 years, Curtis was in over 100 movies and later did well on TV too, like starring in The Persuaders in the 1970s. To everyone watching, it looked like a perfect rise to the top, but the pressure, the big expectations, and the old pain from his childhood never went away. They followed him quietly into fame, into his relationships, and eventually into controversies that only got clear much later. The shadows behind the fame. By the time Tony Curtis was a big name everyone knew, Hollywood had already decided how to use him. The studio system back in the 1950s was fast, strict, and didn't forgive much. If an actor made money one way, that's where they had to stay. For Curtis, that way was obvious right away. He was good-looking, charming, romantic, and safe for fans. The problem was Curtis didn't see himself like that. Even as he got more popular, he got really frustrated being treated like just a pretty face. Studio bosses kept pushing his looks, putting him in parts to pull in young fans instead of letting him try harder acting. Curtis wanted to do different. Things. He wanted deeper roles. He wanted people to take him seriously as an actor. But early on, Hollywood didn't care about letting him break out of the image they made for him. Keeping up that image had its own stress. As a big movie idol, Curtis had to look perfect, talk confident, and act relaxed all the time. Every public event, interview, and movie promo pushed the same fake version of him. There wasn't much space to show real feelings or anything different behind closed doors. That nonstop acting made a big gap between who he really was and who everyone wanted him to be. Over the years, that gap turned into anger. Curtis started speaking out against the business that made him famous, but wouldn't trust him to be more than his looks. Even after he proved himself in tough roles, he felt Hollywood still saw him in that same small way. That feeling of being underrated and trapped stuck with him for years. At the same time, Curtis was fighting mental health problems that he almost never showed in public. He dealt with depression for most of his life, even when his career looked amazing. Being successful didn't make him calm. It actually made the stress worse. The difference between fans loving him and him feeling unhappy inside was hard to handle. To deal with it, Curtis started drinking a lot and using drugs. His addiction kept coming back, especially when he was most famous. The stuff gave him short breaks from worry and hurt feelings. But it cost him big time. His actions got wild. Relationships got hurt. And at work, people started seeing him as less dependable. Studios noticed, directors got careful, and good parts came less often. While he kept acting, the fast rise slowed down. Some chances went away completely. The business that used to cover for him didn't feel like it had to anymore. Still, Curtis didn't just quit. Over the years, he tried many times to beat his addictions. Getting better wasn't easy or straight, but he kept trying. He took TV roles in smaller movies, getting used to a changing industry that didn't care as much about big stars anymore. Then in 1994, Curtis had a loss that hurt worse than any work problem. His son Nicholas Curtis died from a drug overdose at just 23. For Curtis, it was too much. He had fought addiction himself, and now he saw what it did in the worst personal way. The pain crushed him. Friends said it made him face how his life choices hurt, not just him, but the people he loved most. The sadness never really went away. Even years later, Curtis talked about his son with clear hurt in his voice. As he got older, Curtis looked for ways to calm the mess inside from fame, loss, and regrets. One surprise thing became huge in his later life. Painting. What started as just trying out turned into something serious he loved. Curtis painted every day, sometimes like crazy, using art to keep his mind steady and let out feelings without having to explain or act. People started liking his paintings. Shows happened around the world, and collectors wanted them. Curtis talked openly about how painting helped him fight depression and stay sober. It gave him something he fully controlled. In a lot of ways, painting gave him the private space that acting never really did. By his last years, Tony Curtis wasn't chasing the Hollywood version of himself anymore. He was quieter, thought more, and was more honest about his problems. But even then, some parts of his life weren't settled, especially with the people he loved. And nowhere did those unsettled feelings show up more than in his love life. Because behind the fame and talent was a romantic life full of strong feelings, ups and downs, and results that stayed with him until the end. Tony Curtis's chaotic love. Life. As Tony Curtis's career took off through the 1950s and into the next years, his personal life got just as much attention as his movies. Romance wasn't private for stars back then. It was like money for them. Studios pushed it, magazines made it bigger, and fans ate it up. Curtis knew the game well, and sometimes used it to help himself, but the emotional price of everyone watching hurt him for years. His first marriage put him right in the middle of Hollywood's top crowd. Curtis married Janet Leigh on June 4th, 1951 in Greenwich, Connecticut. Back then, Leigh was already a known actress, later famous forever for Psycho. Together, they were one of the most photographed couples around. They were both good-looking, successful, and seemed to want the same things. But behind the pictures, the marriage had problems right from the start. Curtis later said his reasons for marrying Leigh weren't just love. He loved her, but he also needed the good press at that moment. They had two daughters, Kelly Curtis in 1956 and Jamie Lee Curtis in 1958. While Curtis was always working and getting bigger, Leigh handled most of the home stuff. The unfair split got worse as his fame grew. Cheating became something that happened a lot. Long movie shoots, lots of travel, and feeling like he deserved more put too much strain on them. By 1962, it all fell apart because of his affairs and the stress from two big careers. Their divorce ended what looked like perfect Hollywood love, but privately it had stopped working long before. Not long after, Curtis got into a totally different relationship. In 1963, he married Christine Kaufman, a German actress he met filming Taras Bulba. Kaufman was only 18 when they got married. Curtis was more than twice her age and already deep in the wild star life. They had two daughters, Alexandra in 1964 and Allegra in 1966. Curtis later called Kaufman beautiful and innocent, which showed how uneven things were between them. He also said his wild life with too much partying, constant attention, and cheating didn't match what she wanted, something steady. As Kaufman grew up, she wanted her own life and space away from Hollywood's heavy pressure. Curtis didn't change much. His cheating went on, fights got worse, and by 1968 the marriage was over. Kaufman went back to Europe to make a life away from his mess. That same year, Curtis got married again. His third wife was Leslie Allen, an actress and dancer. They married in 1968 when his career was starting to slow a bit. Unlike the earlier ones, this marriage didn't get as much media attention, but the inside problems were just as bad. They had two sons, Nicholas in 1970 and Benjamin in 1973. By then, Curtis's drug and alcohol issues were harder to hide. Addiction messed with his work, money, and being there for family. His career going down added more stress as the power and sure things in Hollywood started to disappear. The marriage lasted longer than the first two, but the same old problems never got fixed. By 1982, Curtis and Allen divorced, ending a relationship that went through more time but still had the same troubles. In 1984, Curtis married Andrea Savio, an actress he met when he was trying to get his life and work steady again. The marriage started hopeful, but it soon showed the same old issues. Curtis later said he wasn't faithful and things were rocky from day one. Fights happened all the time, trust broke down, and by 1992 they divorced, another part of his life ending without fixing anything. Next came one of his shortest marriages. In 1993, Curtis married Lisa Deutsch, a lawyer who wasn't in show business at all. The difference didn't help, though. It lasted only 1 year. Curtis later joked about it dryly, saying it was a mistake from start. The comment was light, but it showed a pattern he didn't hide anymore. He jumped into commitments fast and pulled back emotionally quick. Finally, in 1998, Curtis married Jill Vandenberg Curtis, a horse trainer who was 45 years younger. The big age difference got people talking and criticizing right away, even from his family, but unlike the others, this one lasted. Jill stayed with him until he died in 2010. Curtis always defended the marriage. He said Jill brought peace and order to his life when he needed it bad. Friends said his last years were calmer, more normal, and way less crazy than before. Even with some controversy still around, Curtis seemed more at peace than he had in a long time. Still, marriage was only part of Curtis's love story. All through his career, he was famous for affairs with actresses, models, and other women in the scene. Gossip columns followed him everywhere, often writing about relationships that happened at the same time as his marriages. One of the biggest rumors was with Marilyn Monroe while making Some Like It Hot. Curtis later added to the talk with a comment that stuck with him. In an interview, he said, "I love the idea of working with Marilyn in a movie. My marriage was in a bad state, and I had no idea what hers was like, but I had this insane idea that maybe something would happen between us while we were making the movie." Tony later claimed he and Marilyn had an affair, and she fell in love with him. He allegedly said, "She told me she loved me and more than anything wanted to have babies with me. That made me feel awkward. My wife was expecting our second child. It wasn't a marriage I wanted to stay in, but I didn't want to get divorced at that time because I thought that was the wrong thing to do. But Marilyn wanted to divorce Arthur Miller if I divorced Janet." But the shocking flings didn't stop there. Curtis was also linked for a short time to Natalie Wood in the 1950s. The thing didn't last long, but it added to the story that Curtis jumped from one romance to another easily, never staying long enough for anything solid. Other names came up too: Gloria DeHaven, Mamie Van Doren, and more showed up in gossip a lot. Some were real, some just rumors, but all together they showed the same thing. Curtis was hardly ever single and hardly ever happy with what he had. In later talks, Curtis admitted it straight up. He said he was hooked on the excitement of new love. He was always chasing love, but didn't know how to hold on to it. For Curtis, love was about the chase more than keeping it going. The thrill was more important than making it last. By his last years, a lot of the wild stuff slowed down, but the results of his choices still showed in broken family ties, regrets he couldn't shake, and stories that wouldn't die. And as his health got worse, those results became impossible to ignore. Because the last part of Tony Curtis's life wasn't about glamour or big scandals, but about loss, thinking back, and facing things quietly after the bright lights moved away. Tony Curtis's heartbreaking final years. By the time Tony Curtis hit his 80s, the high energy and always moving style that used to define him turned into body limits and a quiet daily routine. The guy who spent years rushing from movie sets to romances to new starts now had to slow way down. Not because he wanted to, but because his health was failing. Curtis had dealt with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease for a long time, a lung problem that got worse and was tied to his years of smoking. Breathing got harder and harder. Normal stuff needed breaks and planning. Over time, the illness changed his everyday life, taking away his freedom and strength. Along with that, Curtis had major heart issues too. In 1994, he had heart bypass surgery, a big operation that started years of doctor visits and getting better. As time went on, he got weaker. Curtis started using a wheelchair more, not because he liked it, but because breathing and moving left him no choice. He hardly won tea out in public anymore, and when he did, it was planned carefully. When people saw him, the difference from a lively guy in old movies was obvious. In July 2010, just months before he died, Curtis went to the hospital after having trouble breathing at a book signing. It showed how weak he had gotten. For people close to him, it was clear his health wasn't holding up. Curtis went home, but his world got a lot smaller. Curtis had 6 kids from his marriages, including the actress Jamie Lee Curtis. Over the years, he said openly that he wasn't around for them much as a dad. His work, his wild life, and his own fights usually came first. In interviews, he admitted the distance, saying he was mostly gone during their growing up years. His kids talked honestly about how hard it was. They said the relationships felt far away and up and down, with long times apart. Jamie Lee Curtis later called her bond with her dad complicated, a nice way to say there was respect, but also hurt that never got fixed. She said she admired his acting, but didn't hide how tough it was growing up without steady love. As Curtis's health got worse, the emotional gap with his kids didn't get smaller. It just stayed that way. Years went by with not much contact. Holidays passed quietly. No big fights, just long silence. For Curtis, making up seemed like a far-off idea. not something he chased. For his kids, time turned hurt into just accepting it. And right when some people thought maybe they'd fix things, another big shock made the gap bigger. Not long before he died, Curtis changed his will. In a move that surprised Hollywood and his family, he cut out all 6 of his children completely. His about $60 million fortune went only to his 6th wife, Jill Vandenberg Curtis. When the news came out after his death, it shocked people. The reaction came fast and strong. People in the business were stew. And not just by the money part, but by how final it was. Cutting out kids like that is rare with that much money, and even rarer when it's all of them. Curtis was very clear in the papers, saying he meant it and left his kids out on purpose. No confusion, no middle ground. For his family, it felt like an end that went way past money. It was like emotional closing without any fixing. The choice to change the will didn't come out of nowhere. By the late 2000s, Curtis needed help with everyday things and routine. Jill Vandenberg Curtis handled a lot of his daily stuff, home, and when he went out. Friends said Curtis turned more inside himself then, not focused on fixing old ties, but on keeping the calm he finally had. His kids fought the will in court, trying to say it wasn't right or what he really wanted. But they lost. The courts kept Curtis's wishes. Jill got everything. 3 years after Curtis died, she got married again and picked a quiet life away from Hollywood. On September 29, 2010, Tony Curtis died at age 85 in Henderson, Nevada. The main cause was heart and lung failure, with his lung disease and heart problems listed as part of it. His death wasn't a surprise, but it was the end. The long, slow drop was over. A funeral happened in Las Vegas with family, friends, and people from movies there. The event showed the mixed sides of his life. Happy memories and distance right next to each other. Publicly, people remembered him as a huge Hollywood star with a career over 6 decades, someone who shaped American movies back then. Privately, feelings were harder. Curtis left amazing work behind, but also a story full of being apart from family, regrets, and choices that still rang after he was gone. The space he kept in life carried over to how close people remembered him. And yet that wasn't really the end, because years after he passed, someone from his old days spoke up again. Someone who knew him at his biggest time. Someone who talked openly about what she said she saw and what she thought stayed hidden for. For decades, Novak kept it to herself. She never said anything public about Curtis while he was alive. She never went to court. She carried the not knowing alone, saying later it was something she learned to live with instead of fix. She decided to speak much later, with the industry changing and more people ready to hear old hidden stories. Novak said #MeToo made her feel like she'd finally be listened to instead of brushed off. Her story wasn't guesswork or gossip. It was her own memory of something she never got and never forgot. People reacted right away. News places like The Telegraph and The Hollywood Reporter wrote about it, putting in the bigger look back at Hollywood's old golden days. The stories talked about the accusation and also the world back then where things like that could happen with no one getting in trouble. What made Novak's words hit hard was when she said it. Curtis had been gone more than 10 years. He couldn't answer back, no one could check it legally, and there was no normal ending. The story stayed, just as her words, and part of his memory now. For a lot of people, it made them rethink things in a tough way. Tony Curtis had been loved as a fun, charming star from time that rewarded too much and guarded its big names. Novak's story suggested something darker, something that fit with more and more tales of too much power in old Hollywood. At the same time, no court proof or other people seeing it meant the story stayed open. Curtis's fans pointed to that not knowing. Others said the no proof was the whole point, that keeping quiet and uneven power was how it worked back then. But one thing wasn't possible anymore. Pretending the accusation didn't exist. Novak's story became one of the oldest ones tied to #MeToo, going way back to a time people often see as all glamour and sweet. It made it harder to think bad things in Hollywood or just in EW. Instead, it showed a pattern that was there forever but just didn't have a name. For Novak, telling it wasn't about getting even or hurting anyone. It was about being heard. She said it was about being honest, not attacking, and that she didn't want to carry it by herself anymore. What do you think about Kim Novak's accusation? Let us know in the comments section. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you never miss any of our videos. For more interesting content like this, check out the next video on your